Are you ready to be quiet? Do you need a second? Quiet on the set, people. Quiet on the set. That's about as official as I get. I need a clacker. Someone give me one of those clacker things. Hey guys! Today's subscriber request video is all about how to draw croquis without using tracing paper. You know, the tracing paper with the 4-step croquis building process that I have the entire playlist for, you know, that's my preferred method for teaching croquis building, especially for beginners. And I do use an abbreviated version of the 4-step process in my own work. But of course, there are other ways to develop fashion figures. And any teacher worth their salt can explain and teach something in multiple ways. And there are just going to be a few times where using tracing paper is not feasible or desirable. For example, maybe you're drawing from a live reference. You can't exactly stick a piece of tracing paper on the body and start drawing on top. Okay, that just sounds so stupid. Also, different learning styles. So today I'm going to show you guys a couple of ways to approach fashion figures without tracing paper. You're going to need some paper, obviously, non-tracing regular paper. I have 2 different kinds of pencils, mechanical pencils always, because you guys know how I feel about sharpening pencils. This one is a 0.3 size lead HB from Muji. This one is a Pentel 0.5 that I have filled with 4B lead, which is going to be very, very dark. I'll be doing a light underdrawing with this pencil and then finessing and finalizing with this much darker pencil. I have a ballpoint pen. I have my preferred skinny erasers, my Papermate Tough Stuff, and my Pentel Click Eraser. And I have a couple of mechanical color pencils. These are the Pilot Color Eno in 0.7 size. I like to keep these around for correction work. Regardless of your approach, unless you are someone like me who has been drawing for approximately 716 years, you're going to need good visual reference. I mean, I've been drawing for a really long time and I don't really need visual reference for a simple fashion pose, but I'll still use them for more complicated poses like, something that's more dance inspired, ballet poses. Yeah, for the most part, you're going to need your visual references. Large images with clean lighting in good fashion poses, models that are not wearing much in the way of clothing so that you can see their anatomy. One of the most important things to capture in a fashion figure are the vertical proportions. So I've created a chart here. Now, you'll have heard these phrases, 10-head figure, 8-head figure. Most humans, they're about an 8-head figure. She's about an 8-head figure. Elongated fashion figures, they're typically a 10-head figure. Some people like to use something in between because they like the tall, graceful look, but not super exaggerated. Whatever. So I created a 10-head chart here. All of these sections are the same size. My sections are 1 1/8 inches wide. You don't have to use that. Use the measurement that fits your paper the best. And I drew plumb lines. You're going to take your swipe and you're going to draw plumb lines on your swipe. Your plumb line is your center of gravity, and it's going to be the reference line for transferring this pose onto your paper. Your plumb line starts at the base of your neck, your suprasternal notch, and ends where the weight distribution is in your feet. Now, when you look at her feet, most of the weight is on this foot. She's just balancing a little bit on this foot. And so I'm going to say my center of gravity is here. Don't worry if this line isn't exactly perfectly parallel to the edge of the paper, because Photoshop. With this guy, of course, his center of gravity again starts at the pit of his neck. And all his weight is on this foot because this foot is literally hovering midair. So of course, all his weight is here. So the weight is in the middle of this foot, through his neck, base of his neck. And there's your plumb line. If you see a swipe, and swipe being my nickname for visual reference, if you see a swipe and you can't tell where the weight distribution is in the feet, get up and do the pose yourself and feel how the weight is distributed between your own feet. So let's start with the female fashion figure. Now I'm using this lighter pencil, and if I were doing this on my own, I would be drawing super lightly because it's the underdrawing, the gesture, getting the pose. I'm going to draw a little darker than I usually do just to make sure that the camera picks up my drawing. But just keep in mind that you want to keep this step really, really light. This corresponds to step 1 in my 4-step process. So you know this is one head, and so her head is going to be this big. When you look at your reference, her head goes almost exactly through the plumb line. The center of her face is like right next to it. You know, I like an upside down egg shape for heads. The second head mark will sit right at the top of her breasts, like the top of a strapless dress. It's at this angle, which is parallel to her shoulder angle. Here, that's the angle. One breast here, another breast here. Many of you are familiar with my double-headed Mickey Mouse, where I take a circle about the same size or it's slightly smaller than my breast, and I set them at a Mickey Mouse angle to create my shoulder. Here's her breast, here's her shoulder ball, right? And so I'm creating that same look, the double-headed Mickey Mouse. You're going to draw her center front. Okay, there's her center front through her breasts. Use her belly button as a reference, and then that's the center of her pelvis. And you can see how it stays pretty close to the plumb line. So we're here, we're here. Waist is at 3, so we're going to create this trunk here, a little rib cage, and it's going to end at 3. Crotches are at 4 1/4. Not 1/4 inch, but 25% of the space of this space. There's about half, there's about 1/4, and that's going to be the bottom of her crotch. The center of her crotch actually coincides with your plumb line, so that's where that goes. So complete your center front line. Use her hip bones as a guide to figure out the angle of her hips. The angle of the hips is going to be perpendicular to the center front. So we are here. That's the bottom of her hips. She is slightly 3/4, okay? We'll draw her pelvic box in here. That's her right front. That's her left front. And this is all side. She's twisting a little bit. And so, yeah, we're going to do that too. There's her front. There's her side. And I have a whole video on working on pelvic boxes called, what did I call it? I'm going to post the official title of that video when I'm editing. Here it is. Ta-da! Okay, that's what it's called. So if you need help with your pelvic boxes, go check out that video. So there's my pelvic box in there. Elbows are at 3. And they're both pretty straight up and down. And they follow the angle of the shoulders. Both the arms kind of bend at the elbows and swing out slightly. And elbows, wrists are about crotch level. So we're here and we're here, following the angle of the hip. So we're here and here. Gesture the hands. From head to crotch, most figures fit these parameters. These are the idealized proportions for fashion figures. Things change up a little bit in the legs depending on how elongated you want your figure. Traditional, like long models, they are 8.5 head figures, which means their knees will be just above the 6 line, and then their ankles will be at 8, and their foot will be 8.5, 8 3/4 in heels. Traditional fashion figures have the knees exactly in the middle of the 6 mark, and then ankles at 9, and their toes will graze the 10 mark in a high heel. Some people like somewhere in between, so you can set your knee here and then put your ankle somewhere in this space between the 8 and the 9, and then your foot in a high heel should be about 1 head. A foot that is in flats should be about half a head. I'm going to demo with the elongated leg. I always draw the leg with the most weight on it first. So see this knee, it's a little bit separated from the plumb line. And then the ankle is touching the plumb line, so we're here. And so my leg is here, here, and then my foot is gonna sit here. Watch the angle of your knees. It's pretty straight because this one is sticking up but forward. And so with the foreshortening, about so. 1, 2 1/4. 1, 2. And then the angle of her ankles is about there. So we're going to mimic that. There. There's her other foot. And there is the gesture for this pose translated onto your own paper. And this is where you would proceed to draw steps 2, 3, and 4 from my other videos, but just directly on here. If you need a step 2, I would go in still very lightly and fill in my anatomy, etc., etc. And then for step 3, and if you are having difficulty with anatomy or you need some help with that, I have all those videos on how to draw leg shapes, how to draw arm shapes. So I'm going to use my very dark 4B lead mechanical pencil in the 0.5 millimeter size and draw in my anatomy shapes. Breasts on croquis should always look like they're wearing an invisible bra because most women wear bras before they put clothes on. And so when you're designing on top of the figure should look like she's already wearing a bra. Observe your negative spaces as a guide to help you. Hips are always widest at crotch level. Knees are round on the inside, straight on the outside. There's my kneecap and my tibial tuberosity. Calf curves high on the outside, taper in and then flare back out from the ankle bone. Calf curves low on the inside, taper, come back out. Shin bones, they do have a slight curve, not as much as the muscle, but those curves are there. She doesn't have a negative space there, but I made her a little bit skinnier, so she is going to have some there. And then with step 4, I'm going to go in with my color, and I'm going to just correct a few things. Like, I want to trim her calves down a little bit, work some symmetry things. I'm going to drop her breast a hair. There is such a thing as too perky. Slim down this arm a little bit, and so forth and so forth. And then I will go in and I would erase and clean things up a little bit so that you have a nice clean figure to work with. At this stage, I would drop this figure into a Xerox machine and make some copies so that I have loose sheets. Oh, I forgot to mention before, when I draw this proportions chart, I use a ballpoint pen, so no matter what erasing I do on top, my proportions chart underneath stays intact. Proportions are a little bit different for guys, but the process is the same. We're going to take our pencil. We drew our plumb line. Let's analyze some of these angles. We're using his clavicles to create the angle of his shoulders and his pecs. His center front is very easy to find because he's very muscular. There's the angle of his hips. Again, perpendicular to his center front. Okay. That's where his elbows are. That's where his waist is. And so you're seeing those angles create the curve of his body. The center of his face is almost exactly where the plumb line is. So I'm going to draw that. I'm going to draw his head. The 2 should be, right around his armpits, right around the center of his pec box. So the angle is here. Men's shoulders should be about 3 times the width of his head. That's going to be where his shoulders are. We already know that that is the line of his neck. There's his waist at 3 as well. His center front goes to the right of the plumb line. We're going to mark that. And so we're here. And so his pecs are here and here. He's a little bit twisted and you can see quite a bit of his rib cage. So that's his waist, but also out here like this. And that's going to be the edge of his shoulders. So we're going to drop his delts in here. His clavicle sits at an angle. You guys see that? So we're going to also draw it at an angle. And his trapezius. Men's crotches are at 4.5. Again, not half an inch, but half of this space. So the center of his crotch is still a little bit to the right of the plumb line, but kind of curving back. Keep this curve. This still perpendicular here. That's the angle of his hips. This is pretty much a full front pelvic box. You don't see much in the way of the sides. Elbows are at 3 again, so angled out a little bit. He's swinging his arms as he walks. And this one is swinging out even more and angled up. Wrists are very close to crotch level. They would be at crotch level if they were straight down, but again, he's swinging his arms, so they're a little bit higher. And they're angled out, coming back in a little bit, angled out, coming back in a little bit. This one is higher because it's more foreshortened. And again, just like with the female figure, where you place your knees and ankles will affect the overall look, the proportions. Like this will stay the same for most men. And then in here, you can have your knees at 6. You see how the weight leg, the plumb line is just inside the knee. And then ankles are directly in the plumb line. So if you want an ordinary shorter figure, you can have your ankles at 8, and then men typically don't wear heels, so their feet will land half a head down. So that's for a short guy. If I wanted an elongated guy, I would drop his knee so that the top of his knee is at the 6 mark, and then I would put my ankle at 9. I would set his toes about 3/4 down, because the more I elongate a male figure, the more I make his feet and his hands bigger to get the proportions right, because most taller men have bigger hands and bigger feet. And just like the female figure, you can, set your ankle in somewhere in the middle if you're looking for somewhere in between elongated and regular human height. Again, I do the weight leg first. So there's my knee, there's my thigh, there's my calf, and there's my foot. Using the angle of the hips to create the angle with the knees, there is my other knee. This one is a straight up and down thigh. My kneecap is down here because the leg is bent. This ankle is kind of halfway between the knee and the ankle there. So I'm going to put my ankle about there. The calf is sitting at an inward angle. And then this foot is not foreshortened. It's hanging almost straight down. And there's the gesture for my male figure. And then again, I'm going to switch to my darker pencil and I'm going to draw the muscle shapes. And I have a whole video on how to draw muscle shapes for guys. And then just like the female figure, if I wanted to go in and make any corrections, I would use my red pencil to help me see better, etc., etc. Use your negative shapes in here to create the right shapes that you need, and then go ahead and clean things up, etc., etc. When I am drawing live models, I have a preferred method. I like to use chalk pastels and charcoal pencils to create a gesture. Now, sometimes you get so into drawing these small figures, I'm guilty of this as well, that you start kind of tightening up. And sometimes you need a good session of big, loose, big arm drawing to loosen yourself up and recapture expression and gesture again. When I'm stuck in a rut, my first tendency is to draw in a different way, paint in a different way than I usually do. And one of the things I'll do is I'll bust out my drawing horse and my big 24-inch drawing pad and draw real big with messy stuff and just get my forearms all dirty. Okay. I love that stuff. These are materials left over from college. When you're the broke college kid on 17 different scholarships, you just get really good at taking care of your stuff. I have a lot of things in here, but I'm just going to point out the things that I use the most. So the ones I use the most are these cheapy little General's charcoal pencils. They come in soft, hard, extra soft, 6B, 4B, HB. I have an X-Acto for sharpening. I have some color pencils. I have, Conte crayons and whatnot. And then these new pastels from Prismacolor. And they're basically chalk pastels, but they're really firm and they don't dust as much. And I keep them in really light colors. I'm going to demo on this, 14-inch paper, just because I can't fit my 24-inch drawing board under my camera, and the principles are the same. Get in here, and of course, let's pretend that I'm observing a model. Getting the angles, the center front, right? Angle of the bust, waist, hips, crotch, getting that angle in there. There's my rib cage, there's my pelvic box, my gesture line for my knee, the angle of my knees, angle of my ankles. Get in there with the details of the figure now that I have the pose down. If you are someone who is having difficulties with vertical proportions, I would encourage you guys to try drawing a proportions chart, even on your big drawing pads, to help you kind of map out for your fashion figures. So again, I have my head measurements and I have them numbered. And then I'm going to take my new pastel again and make sure that I'm following the vertical proportions here. 4 1/4, that's the waist, that's my crotch, knees are at 6, ankles are at 9, angle of the hips, angle of the knees, angle of my ankles. Hunch shoulder action. She's stooped over a little bit, so I'm gonna drop her breasts a little. There's her rib cage, there's her center front, there's her crotch. I love a woman with really large hips, very sexy. So I'm gonna give her some thighs and some hips, but still keep crotch level as the widest part of her hips. Oh, I'm having so much fun with this demo right now. I definitely need to go hit one of those life drawing events. I'm really itching for it. Right? So you can have the gesture and the flow and the pretty and the line quality, but you're really, kind of staying true to your proportions so that you're getting the fashion figure proportions that you want. Same goes for dudes. So those are some techniques that I use to develop fashion figures without tracing paper. But the 4-step croquis building process that I introduced to you guys in the beginning of my channel adventures, that is still my preferred method for beginners. And I encourage you guys to watch those anyway, because they will give you really good information on how to develop pelvic boxes and, what kind of anatomy markers to look for, and, how to draw leg shapes and how to finesse figures once you're done with most of it, things like that. Okay. And I would encourage that this video would be kind of, an extra, not to replace. Okay, so you have the information from the 4-step process, and then this is just an extra way to help you develop fashion figures. As usual, if you have a question, check the info box. If not, if the answer is not there, leave me a comment. My next video in the fashion figures series is going to address how to draw side view figures for both men and women, and all those specific anatomical shapes and gestures. So hit the subscribe button for an alert when that one comes out. I don't know what it's going to be, probably sometime this summer. And yeah, hashtag always be practicing. We are not made of magic. We are made of practice. So go practice, and I will see you next time.